At first glance, the hallway appears ordinary, silent, empty, untouched by time. But behind the stillness lies a truth that waited 23 years to be uncovered. This is where it began, in a place filled with glamour, ambition, and hidden shadows. The mannequin standing at the far end was seen by countless employees, passed by without a second thought, accepted as part of the agency's decor. Yet beneath its painted surface, something unimaginable was sealed away. A secret so carefully preserved that even those who worked here daily never questioned its presence. But secrets have their own gravity, a pull that only grows stronger with time. And in this darkened corridor, the truth was waiting, patient, silent, and ready to be found. She had been cleaning this building for years, slipping through its rooms with practiced quiet. But on that morning, something felt different. A door, usually stuck, slid open with unusual ease. The smell of old resin and dust drifted into the light as her eyes adjusted. She wasn't expecting much, maybe discarded props, maybe forgotten equipment. Instead, she found stands filled with mannequin parts, each covered in years of stillness. And there, in the far corner, stood the one figure that didn't seem quite like the others. Something about its posture, its texture, its presence felt strangely human. In a place built on illusion, this moment felt too real. She didn't yet know what she had discovered, but instinct told her one thing: she needed to call someone. The silence of the room was finally breaking. What began as routine inspection became a moment that would redefine the investigation. Forensic lights illuminated every inch of the figure, catching the cracks in the resin, the subtle depressions where skin should never be. When gloved hands began to peel away the hardened surface, the room shifted from professional to personal. Beneath the synthetic shell, a human face emerged, preserved, suspended, waiting. The team moved with quiet precision, each new revelation deepening the weight of what they uncovered. This wasn't a mannequin at all. It was a person, someone who had been missing for decades. Someone whose story had been silenced. As the truth came into focus, the clinical environment took on a somber tone. This discovery was no accident. It was a message hidden in plain sight. And the world was finally ready to hear it. Her face filled the pages, bright, hopeful, full of promise. Elena Moretti was the rising star everyone talked about in the late 90s. Her portfolio told a story of ambition, discipline, and the kind of beauty the industry chased endlessly. Each photograph captured a different side of her, yet none hinted at the darkness gathering behind the scenes. She trusted the agency that promised her fame. She trusted the man who claimed to guide her career. What she didn't know was that admiration sometimes disguises obsession, and success can draw shadows as easily as light. As investigators flipped through her portfolio, they weren't just looking at images. They were looking at a life frozen in time, a life stolen before it had a chance to bloom. These photos weren't just memories, they were evidence of everything she was meant to become. Hidden deep within newspaper archives, her disappearance had long become just another cold case headline. Model disappears without trace once sparked public concern, but time has a way of dulling even the sharpest tragedies. The circled article, the one investigators now revisited, spoke of uncertainty, speculation, and unanswered questions. Reporters had searched for angles, police had chased leads, and the city had whispered theories. But no one suspected that the truth was sitting behind the locked doors of the very agency meant to protect her. As the years passed, her name faded from public memory, but the red circle around that headline reminded investigators that silence doesn't erase truth, it only buries it. And buried truths have a way of resurfacing. The examination room was cold, controlled, and respectful. Every tool was placed with precision, every movement measured. Forensic pathologists approached the preserved remains not with fear, but with profound responsibility. The resin that once hid her identity now became the very element that preserved the evidence of her final moments. Layer by layer, they uncovered fractures, chemical traces, and minute details that told a silent story. She had not died by accident. She had not vanished willingly. Something deliberate had happened, something planned. The forensic team knew that in cases like these, the body often becomes the clearest witness. And as her preserved form revealed its secrets, the truth she had carried for 23 years began to speak. That in the dim yellow light of the old office, investigators pieced together the paper trail that Richard Holden never expected anyone to find. The folders labeled EM were small but significant, containing memos, schedules, and notes that placed Elena at the center of the agency's financial struggles. She had begun asking questions that threatened to expose discrepancies Richard had spent years hiding. This office, once the center of his control, now revealed everything he tried to bury. Unsent emails, deleted drafts, and confidential letters painted a picture of a man whose professional mask concealed growing desperation. Here, in this room frozen in time, investigators saw what Elena saw long ago, the cracks in Richard's world. And those cracks led straight to motive. The blueprint of the storage room became the backbone of the investigation. Every vent, door hinge, and access point was studied, measured, and analyzed. Red strings connected timestamps of movements long forgotten, revealing a pattern no one noticed at the time. This wasn't just a room, it was a map of intent. Someone had planned meticulously, using airflow, temperature, and isolation to preserve what should never have been preserved. Each red line told a hidden part of the story: when Richard entered, when he stayed, when he returned under the cover of night. Investigators realized this space wasn't simply used, it was engineered. The silence of the room mirrored the silence of the crime. And on the wall, the blueprint stood as a quiet reminder of how carefully darkness can operate in plain sight. The old security camera still clung to the wall like a relic of a system that failed long ago. It blinked, barely functional, its lens clouded by decades of dust. Investigators discovered it had been disconnected only weeks before Elena vanished, an act dismissed at the time as a simple electrical fault. But now, in hindsight, it revealed something far more deliberate. Someone knew how the system worked. Someone knew when it would leave no record. The missing footage from those critical nights became one of the most damning absences in the case. Technology that should have protected her instead became part of the silence. And in that silence, one man operated without being seen. The basement of Kingston Model Collective held years of forgotten material, props, equipment, broken lights. But in a corner near the rusted pipe sat a box that changed everything. Inside were undeveloped film rolls from the early 2000s, untouched for decades. When processed, the photographs revealed glimpses of the agency's past: rehearsals, sets, displays. But among them, one image stood out. Blurry, dimly lit, and unintentional, it captured the storage room, and in the corner, the silhouette of the mannequin. The proportions matched Elena exactly. The timestamp on the film placed her preserved form in the room just months after she disappeared. This single photo bridged 23 years of unanswered questions. What was once speculation became truth immortalized on film. In the courtroom sketch, he looked small, fragile, diminished, a shell of the commanding figure he once was. Richard Holden entered the courtroom not as a respected agency director but as a defendant facing the weight of decades. His wheelchair seemed to swallow him, yet his presence still carried a quiet intensity. Prosecutors argued that age did not erase accountability. The judge listened carefully, the courtroom still, every eye trained on the man who had hidden so much. The sketch artist captured more than features, they captured the tension between past power and present consequence. Here, truth had overtaken illusion. And the man who once controlled everything now faced the only thing he could not manipulate: justice. The memorial was quiet, intimate, filled with faces marked by both sorrow and relief. After 23 years, Elena finally had a place to rest, her story no longer suspended in uncertainty. White flowers lined the table where her photograph stood, capturing her in a moment of laughter, hopeful and bright. Investigators, former colleagues, and her family gathered not to mourn the years she lost, but to reclaim her truth. The soft sunlight filtering through the trees felt like a silent acknowledgement that her journey, though tragic, had finally reached its conclusion. Justice had arrived late, but it had arrived nonetheless. And in that peaceful moment, her memory shifted from mystery to meaning. Every investigation reaches a moment when scattered fragments begin to point in one direction. For the detectives working the Moretti case, that moment came when Richard's name emerged repeatedly, on financial documents, travel logs, deleted emails, and staff testimonies. The evidence board became a constellation of connections circling back to him. His influence had been subtle but persistent, woven into every unexplained detail. Detectives worked night after night, reviewing patterns, following overlooked threads, and piecing together a truth long obscured. On the wall, beneath the harsh white light, his name sat at the center, no longer a respected authority, but a suspect tied to every shadow in the case. Under the macro lens, the truth became undeniable. The resin, once smooth and uniform, now bore fractures, tiny splits that exposed what lay beneath. Investigators traced the cracks like roadmaps, each one peeling back the illusion Richard had built. The preserved skin showed patterns no mannequin could ever replicate. Human detail. Human fragility. Human tragedy. This was not a display piece. It was a life frozen against its will. The camera captured what the naked eye had missed for decades. And in those magnified details, the case transitioned from mystery to certainty. The attic office hadn't been touched in years, yet it held the key to Richard's unraveling. Financial ledgers revealed discrepancies carefully hidden behind forged signatures and misreported expenses. Torn receipts matched purchases of resin, lacquer, and industrial drying agents. And the half-burned envelope, bearing Elena's initials, hinted at a letter never meant to be found. Investigators sifted through every scrap, reconstructing the secret world Richard operated behind closed doors. Money flowed in patterns that aligned with her disappearance, proving the crime wasn't impulsive, it was calculated. The attic told a story more honest than Richard ever could. Throughout the late 90s, Richard cultivated an image of guidance and professionalism. But behind that facade was a controlling presence, one that watched, monitored, and intervened from the shadows. The frosted glass became a metaphor investigators used often. You could see the outline of his influence, but never the full truth. His control was subtle, rarely seen directly, yet always felt by those beneath him. Models trusted him, staff deferred to him, and the industry praised him. But power, when unchecked, often breeds secrecy. And secrecy, when protected long enough, becomes something far darker. Elena sensed it too late. The frosted outline was always watching. On the evidence table, every piece told part of the story. Resin samples linked the preservation materials directly to Richard's purchases. Autopsy photos revealed the hidden injuries, the trauma no one saw beneath the resin. Blueprints outlined the controlled environment he created to hide her. Receipts provided the financial trail he thought he erased. And the gloves symbolized the cold precision with which he carried out each step. Together, they formed a narrative stronger than any confession. The table wasn't just evidence, it was the truth laid bare. And once assembled, it left no room for doubt. The abandoned studio felt like a graveyard of forgotten dreams. Torn backdrops sagged from rusted hooks, and broken lights lay like fallen monuments to a glamorous past. Dust-covered portfolios told the stories of young hopes, faces that once believed this place would lead them to stardom. Among them, Elena's portfolio sat untouched, its edges frayed from years of neglect. Investigators walked through this silent space, feeling the weight of ambition that once filled the room. This was where Elena worked, laughed, practiced, and trusted. Yet it was also where her disappearance began, quietly, subtly, almost invisibly. The contrast between what the studio promised and what it had became a powerful reminder. Sometimes the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows. The autopsy report was clinical, precise, and heartbreakingly final. Highlighted trauma points revealed the violence she endured, injuries masked for decades beneath layers of resin. Time of death estimates contradicted the narrative Richard had built, proving she did not die instantly, as he once claimed in his private accounts. The report unfolded the truth gently but relentlessly, every line a quiet accusation, every measurement a step closer to justice. Investigators studied the pages, tracing the timeline of her final hours. For all the years Elena was displayed as an object, the report finally gave her humanity back. Science, unbothered by emotion or lies, revealed the cruelty that stole her future. And in that sterile document, her voice returned. The interrogation room was cold and unforgiving, designed to strip away the illusions suspects hide behind. Richard sat in the metal chair, smaller than he had ever appeared to the world. The overhead light cast sharp shadows on the table where an old cassette recorder waited, silent but ready. This wasn't just an interview. It was the moment years of truth collided with decades of lies. Detectives asked questions with measured calm, allowing the weight of evidence to do the work. Richard's breathing grew heavier, his voice thinner. The room didn't pressure him, his conscience did. The silence after each question stretched long, revealing cracks in the story he had rehearsed for years. And by the time the confession tape clicked off, the illusion of innocence had collapsed completely. At dusk, the graveyard carried a stillness words could never match. The fading sunlight touched Elena's headstone softly, as if acknowledging the years stolen from her. Engraved beneath her name were dates that represented a life interrupted. But the visitors who came did not mourn her death alone, they honored the truth finally reclaimed. Flowers rested gently at the base, left by those once too afraid to speak, those who doubted their own memories, and those who simply cared. The wind moved through the grass like a whisper, reminding everyone that justice, however delayed, had arrived. In this quiet place, Elena was no longer a mystery, a mannequin, or a missing person. She was finally herself again. The news conference marked the moment the world learned what truly happened. Cameras flashed relentlessly as detectives stepped forward, holding documents, photographs, and the final report. They spoke of persistence, breakthroughs, and the power of one cleaner who refused to ignore what others dismissed. The room filled with the sound of typing, questions, and shock. After 23 years, a case once declared unsolvable had been brought to light. Reporters struggled to comprehend how a respected figure maintained such a dark secret. But amidst the noise, one message stood clear: truth may sleep, but it never dies. And when it awakens, it demands to be heard. The scales of justice stood tall in the courthouse hallway, a silent reminder of what the system strives to protect. Half bathed in sunlight, half swallowed by shadow, it mirrored the duality of human nature, ambition paired with greed, beauty coupled with darkness. Richard's trial became a national discussion, but for investigators, it was simpler: truth versus the story he crafted. The evidence weighed heavily, tilting the scales long before the verdict. Justice moved slowly, but it moved with certainty. And when the courtroom doors finally closed behind the sentencing, the statue remained, a silent witness to the balance restored. The dissolving resin sculpture became the final metaphor in the case. Forensic teams submerged fragments into controlled baths, watching as the artificial layers peeled away. Beneath the cracking resin, human texture emerged, a truth hidden for over 2 decades. The scene captured more than science, it represented the unraveling of Richard's illusion. What he sculpted to preserve became the very evidence that condemned him. The warm water washed away years of secrecy, letting the story return to reality. In those dissolving layers, investigators saw the fragile line between art and deception, and how far one man went to blur it. The city moved on, as cities always do, its skyline glowing softly against the night. But beneath the quiet hum of life, a chapter had closed. The Moretti case, long unsolved, long whispered about, finally rested in truth. For investigators, it was a reminder that persistence matters. For her family, it was the closure they deserved. And for those who walk past the Kingston Model Collective building, now shuttered, it stands as a silent warning: secrets may survive for years, but not forever. Justice finds its way through cracks, through questions, through the courage of ordinary people. In the end, the city lights continued to shine, but now, they illuminated a truth no longer buried in shadow.